Good evening and welcome. My name is Stephen Dullins and I'm the CEO of Ray White Victoria. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to our webinar this evening. Thank you for taking the time to join us. We believe this is an important evening because of the changes coming to the Residential Tenancies Act of Victoria and the potential impact this will have on our customers and property owners across the state. This evening our webinar is hosted by our CEO of Property Management, Emily Sim, and Shaun Doyle from our Victorian Property Management team.
Thank you, Stephen, and hello everyone. Firstly, a little bit about who we are. Ray White is Australasia's largest property group with more than 920 offices and 10,000 property professionals. In Victoria, across our 106 offices, we have more than 500 property managers servicing 50,000 properties for our clients. Tonight I'm joined by Shaun Doyle, who's been working within our network for the last 2 years to ensure that we're in the best position to support our customers as these changes come into effect. We're proud to say that almost every single one of our Ray White property managers in Victoria have completed and graduated their online learning course, with remaining few due to complete their courses in the coming days. We are confident that our team of 500 plus skilled property managers around Victoria will be able to assist you. Shaun, how is it that we find ourselves in this situation? How is it that these changes have come about?
Thanks, Emily. The current legislation that we operate under, the Residential Tenancies Act, has served us well for the past 20 years, but it's failed to keep up with the modern changes of our society. As our population grows, so does the need for rental properties. The 2021 rental reforms are the biggest update to these laws, with more than 130 changes being made, with the majority starting in just a few weeks, on the 29th of March 2021. Tonight, we won't be covering all of these changes, but rather we're going to be discussing the changes which we think property owners want to know about. Throughout our network of 106 offices in Victoria, we've been listening to the questions that our 49,000 clients have been asking.
We have members from our network online tonight to help answer any questions that you might have. At the end of the webinar, we will answer a few of these questions live. For the questions we can't answer tonight, we will collate the questions from the chat box throughout the evening and produce educational resources to be sent out to our offices in the coming days. So feel free to reach out to your local Ray White property manager and request a copy of this information booklet if you would like any further information about the reforms. So let's have a look at the key changes you need to be across.
Before we start, we just want to let you know that the information and research is not our own. As we go through tonight, we'll be discussing the changes which will impact you and the research which the government did before they made the changes. Before the new legislation and regulations were made, there was a lengthy consultation process with many government and industry bodies involved in the decision-making process. All of the facts and stats tonight have been lifted directly out of their research and is not conducted by Ray White. There's also more information about these changes on the Consumer Affairs Victoria website. So with that being said, we've got a lot to get through, so let's have a look. As you can see on the screen, here are the changes that we feel you need to be across.
Okay, the first change we need to touch on is terminology. From the 29th of March, landlords will now be known as rental providers. That's a pretty significant change. Tenants will also be known as renters, and lease agreements will change to be known as rental agreements. Definitely big changes to the language in our industry, and this is why we need to make you aware of these things. Let's get into it. This first part is really the most significant change. Shaun, let's go through the introduced minimum standards.
Sure. Rental agreements entered into after the 29th of March 2021 need to meet the minimum requirements. Let's say you've entered into a fixed term lease agreement in January 2021, which is due to expire in January 2022. These minimum standards do not apply until 2022. The minimum standards are one of the largest amendments. Let's have a look at them. As you can see on the screen, we've got working locks on both doors and windows, vermin-proof rubbish bins, a working toilet in an appropriate area, a bathroom with a supply of hot and cold water, a kitchen with a dedicated cooking area, an oven and stove, and a working sink with hot and cold water, structurally sound and weatherproof premises, free from mould and damp caused by the building structure, electrical switchboards that meet the prescribed standards, window coverings for privacy, natural and artificial light, ventilation and heating. The most interesting two there on that list is the electrical switchboards that meet the prescribed standards. This actually isn't coming in until the 29th of March 2023. So there's a 2-year rolling period there for properties to meet that standard. And similarly with the heating, the minimum standard from the 29th of March this year is a fixed heater of good working order. However, there's a 2-year rolling period. So on the 29th of March 2023, that becomes a fixed heater of at least a 2-star energy efficient rating. So again, we've got a 2-year rolling period there as well. There's a lot there to take in. You need to remember that we'll be sending out some more information after this webinar with a lot more details about that. Now, we need to remember that these minimum standards are also not best practice. They're not highest efficiency or highest quality. They are simply meeting the basic performance. These laws aren't designed to be a financial burden on rental providers, but simply ensuring that every rental property in Victoria is safe and comfortable for renters.
So Shaun, what does that actually look like? How big of an impact is this going to have?
Well, look, previously the only requirement was that the rental provider was required to ensure that the rented property was vacant and in reasonably clean condition before the renter occupied the property, and to maintain the property in good repair during the rental agreement. Now, properties also need to meet the minimum standards prior to occupation. The good thing is though, 9 out of 10 renters surveyed already said that their rental property was in average, good or excellent condition. Now we've got to remember that all of this information was pulled from the regulatory impact statement. This means that about 1 out of 10 properties, or about 11%, may not meet the minimum standards. Now, the initial cost of the minimum standards will be borne by rental providers. I don't know how many houses don't have locks, toilets, kitchens, bathrooms, heating or laundries, but if a property needed all of those to upgrade to meet the minimum standards, which is highly unlikely, the estimated cost of these works would be about $8,700. The estimated average cost of rental properties that don't meet the minimum standards is only about $1,650, and some of these costs can be reduced by accessing government rebates. But chances are, 9 out of 10, that your property already meets the minimum standards and you won't need to upgrade anything. If we have a look at that final property, the 1 out of 10, the chances are the only upgrade you'll need to do is a water efficient shower head. Now we've got to remember that these prescribed rental minimum standards are being phased in and will only apply when a new rental agreement begins.
So that's everything with minimum housing standards?
One more thing that the research showed was it's estimated that some of the costs will be passed through to renters via higher rents. These are typically related to the works to make the property more energy efficient or to increase the value of the property. About 2 out of 3 renters who were surveyed in the consultation process said that they would be happy to pay more rent for an energy efficient property. Like I said before, after this webinar, we'll be sending out a booklet which contains all of the minimum standards and their requirements. So you can have a look through and think about if your rental property needs any work. Your Ray White property manager will also make contact with you prior to releasing to speak to you about any minimum standard requirements at your property.
If you haven't inspected your investment property for more than a couple of years, before the next tenancy agreement would be a good time to chat to your property manager about when the next available opportunity for you to join in on a routine inspection is.
The next change we need to have a look at is the safety related activities. These are another significant change to the laws. Many renters surveyed by the government said that while their properties were in good condition, they didn't feel that they were provided in a safe environment. Similarly to the minimum standards, rental agreements entered into after the 29th of March 2021 need to meet the safety related requirements. So let's have a look at what these are. You can see here we've got electrical appliance safety checks, gas safety checks, smoke alarm testing and compliance, pool fence safety and compliance checks, fire tanks and pumps. Now, not all of these apply. For example, the pool fence safety and compliance checks only apply to properties with a pool. The fire tanks and pumps only apply to properties in bushfire areas. But what we need to focus on are the top 3 there. The requirements are as follows. The rental provider must ensure that each smoke alarm is correctly installed and in a working condition, and each smoke alarm is tested according to the manufacturer's instructions at least once every 12 months. Now, this should be done by a suitably qualified person. The gas safety check only applies to properties with gas appliances, but it is a safety check of all gas installations and fittings in the rented premises, and it's to be conducted every 2 years by a licensed or registered gas fitter. And finally, the electrical safety check is a safety check of all electrical appliances and fittings provided by the rental provider in the rented premises, and is conducted every 2 years by a licensed and registered electrician.
So why is this so important?
Well, Emily, there is about 2,500 preventable house fires each year in Victoria. 30% of those house fires actually occur in rental properties, and 50% of those rental properties don't have a working smoke alarm. The introduction of these safety-related measures is estimated to have a huge impact on the safety of the occupants, and also the reduction of costs associated with house fires or injuries. What this means for you ultimately, it reduces your risk and it protects your renter from harm. Based on your individual position, you also may be able to claim the costs associated with any safety-related activities as a tax deduction. But obviously, talk to your accountant or financial advisor for further information in this space. The industry has so many different companies which are providing these checks, and our officers have been in discussions with their local preferred provider in the lead up to the 29th of March to make sure you keep a lookout with your local Ray White property manager, as they will let you know when these are going to apply to your property.
The safety checks can, understandably, seem quite overwhelming, especially in addition to the minimum housing standards, and we've still got more to go this evening. However, there is a process, and speaking to your Ray White property manager is the best way to work through what's essential now, what's already in place. As Shaun's already mentioned this evening, many of these things will most likely already be in place with your investment property. It's just that we're in a position now where it's actually going to be regulated and law.
Another area of the changes to regulations is in relation to modifications. The new legislation allows for some minor modifications to be made by renters to the property that they're currently renting. Let's have a look at what some of these are. On the screen here, you'll see a comprehensive list of items which a renter can do to a property, which a rental provider cannot unreasonably refuse consent. So what that means is a renter who lives in a property can do these modifications, and a rental provider can't say no, unless there's some reasons which we'll go through. But let's have a look at them. They can install picture hooks or screws for wall mounts, shelves or brackets on brick walls. They can install child safety gates on exposed brick or concrete walls. They can have wall anchoring devices on brick walls to secure items of furniture. They can do works for draft proofing. They can install low flow shower heads. They can install a non-permanent window film, a security system, fly screens on doors and windows, a vegetable or herb garden, installation of a secure letterbox, external gates in the rented premises, and painting. Now, while that list may seem comprehensive, and like I said before, a rental provider cannot unreasonably refuse consent for a renter to carry out and pay for themselves the following types of maintenance. Now, when we look at that list, a rental provider can refuse some of these modifications. For example, if a notice to vacate has been given, if the property can't be restored to the same condition, or if the modification would significantly change the premises or require modifications to other areas of the premises or common areas. Permits may also be requested by the rental provider about these works too. If a renter goes ahead, they may need to pay an additional bond for these modifications. Unless the additional bond will be less than $500 in value, the bond is not proportionate to the reasonable costs, or if there's an agreement that the renter doesn't need to restore the property upon vacating. In the rental agreement, the renter and rental provider are told and educated that at the end of the agreement, they must restore the premises to the condition it was before they moved in, excluding some fair and wear and tear. This includes removing all of the modifications unless the parties agree that they do not need to be removed.
So that's good news. Not every modification is going to have to be restored, and not every modification means that there's permanent damage to the investment property.
No, and that's it. And the good thing is we're going to see in the next section when we go through the forms that renters are actually educated about that as well. So they're told from the very outset, hey, there's some works you can do, however, you do need to take them back before you leave. So let's have a look at that. So for the first time, there is new prescribed forms. And what that means is we are getting a collection of 6 forms that we can use in our industry, but the terms are basically set. It's very difficult to add or subtract any additional text to these forms. So let's have a look at what they are. You can see here, we've got a new Form 1, which is a residential rental agreement of under 5 years. And we've got a Form 2, which is a residential rental agreement of more than 5 years. We've got a Form 3, which is a statement of information. And this we need to provide to the renter prior to them moving into the rental property, just so they know what they're getting. The Form 4 is the ingoing condition report, which we need to provide at the start of the rental agreement. The Form 5 is a rental increase, and a Form 6 is a notice to vacate. We're going to have a look at a bit more detail about what's included in the Form 1, but I just want to point out in the Form 4, which is the ingoing condition report, we are actually required now on the ingoing condition report to list the dates in which the smoke alarms, the gas appliances and the electrical appliances were last serviced. So like we saw back in that previous section about safety related activities, we need to disclose that information to the renter on the ingoing condition report about the dates on when these were last done. Let's have a look at what is on the Form 1. So you can see here, these are some examples which are included on the Form 1, which is a rental agreement of less than 1 year. The rental provider's preferred method of payment of rent, requirements for professional cleaning, safety-related activities which are required, modifications which are permitted, locks, rent increases, access and entry, pets, urgent and non-urgent repairs. So you can see here everything we've essentially said tonight has also been put into this form, so that way all parties are educated as well.
It seems like that everything's wrapped in together in the new tenancy agreement, Shaun, to almost disclose to the tenant absolutely everything about the condition of the property and the terms of the tenancy, which is a real change from what we've had in the past.
Yeah, that's right. And like we said before, some of these forms we can't add or subtract anything, so it's all about creating a fair and level playing field for all parties involved. Let's have a look at the last section before we get into some questions, is to ways to end a rental agreement. This is something that a lot of rental providers have been wanting to know because they've heard that there has been some changes to this section of the Act as well. So you can see here on the screen, we've got some different types of notices that we currently commonly use. There's some new notices which have been added. For example, the damage, danger and threats notice, which is an immediate 0-day notice, is if a renter or someone who resides with that renter has given any damage, danger or threats. The rent arrears procedure, which is our normal 14 days process, has slightly changed as well, and there's a new 5-strike system for renters. And what that means is, if in 12 continuous months, if that renter is late for 5 times in that system, in that 12-month cycle, it just changes the way we apply to VCAT. It gives us a rental provider a little bit more power. The principal place of residence, you'll notice there's an asterisk next to it, along with some other ones there as well, which include repairs, demolition, occupation, and sold or sale. And what that asterisk means is that these notices now require a little bit of extra evidence to support that claim. What that means is when we provide a notice to vacate on a renter, we also need to provide written documentation supporting that. So for example, if we have a look at the 60-day notice for demolition, if we're going to use that notice on a renter, we also, at the time of we issuing that notice, we need to provide plans and permits to confirm that we've registered everything with the council, everything's going ahead, and it's a legit notice. If we have a look at, for example, sold or sale, that's got an asterisk and a hash next to it. The asterisk there means that we need to provide some sort of evidence as well to support that claim. But the hash also includes notices that carry a 6-month ban on releasing. So you can see there the notices demolition, occupation and sold or sale. After that notice has been issued, it carries a 6-month ban where we can't release that property. So just remember that as well when issuing any notices to renters. The last one to talk about there, which is the end of fixed term lease, which is a 90-day notice, that has slightly changed as well. And what that means is the 90-day notice only applies to the first initial rental agreement. After the first initial rental agreement, if that renter and rental provider enter into a new rental agreement, so a subsequent rental agreement, that notice is gone.
So that's really a big change, isn't it, for landlords? You've really got to be across in that first 12 months of tenancy. You've got to make a serious decision at the end about whether you want to renew or not.
Yeah, it's almost like a relationship. It's getting to know you, the getting to know you stage. Understanding that if you and that renter are going to have a good time, but if not, again, there's some certain notices there. I didn't like that.
So that's probably a lot to take in tonight. As we have said earlier, we will have more content coming out to you via your Ray White Property Manager after this evening, and we will make sure to include questions and answers in that for you too. Shaun, before we go tonight, let's take some questions from the audience that we've been collating whilst we've been on air this evening. Our first question is about keys. I read that we need to supply tenants with a set of keys each.
So that is a change in the legislation, and what that means is when a renter enters into a rental agreement, they are entitled to a set of keys or a security device that gives them access to their property. So essentially what that means is if we have a rental agreement with one renter, we need to provide that renter with one set of keys for the property. However, if there's a rental agreement and there's 4 renters listed on that agreement, we'll need to provide each renter with their own set of keys and security device to enter into that property. So a little bit of a different, we've essentially been doing that for quite some time now. It's just written in the legislation that we need to do that.
Okay, next question. What are the timelines for compliance checks, minimum standards and efficiency ratings to be compliant?
So this is a little bit of a tricky one because as we saw, some sections of the regulations have different timeframes. The way you can think about it is essentially after the 29th of March, if you are entering into a new rental agreement, you need to have all of your compliance and minimum standards adhered to. So we can see that the prescribed forms that we just went through before, after the 29th of March, they're the forms that we need to use. And on those forms, we actually need to disclose all of these different requirements. Now, there is a few little differences there in relation to the heating or the prescribed electrical switchboards, but that is a 2-year period. But again, we don't want to overcomplicate it tonight. That's why we'll be sending out more information to you after the webinar.
Okay, we're rolling now. Next question is, do new homes that are leased for the first time need to also have electrical, gas and smoke alarm checks?
Yeah, so that's a little bit of a tricky one because it's not essentially clear. However, as we saw, we need to disclose certain things on the condition report and we need to disclose it in the Form 1, which is a rental agreement of less than 5 years. So even if you've got a brand new home or apartment that's never been rented before and it meets all of those standards, you do need to disclose the last time in that period of time where those checks were done. So yes, after the 29th of March, if you're using those rental agreements or issuing a condition report, then you do need to have those compliancy checks done.
I think we can fit one more question in. This has been asked quite a few times this evening. Can we issue a notice for a tenant to leave without providing any evidence under the new legislation?
Okay, well look, there's a few different ways that we can end a rental agreement. Probably what we can do in that instance is have all parties agree that the rental agreement wants to terminate. So if you can, as a rental provider or renter, negotiate directly and agree on a termination of that rental agreement, well then there's no need to use any evidence there. However, if you do need to follow the more formal path, then yes, you will need to use some of the forms and evidence we just went through when issuing those notice to vacates.
We've got time for a couple more questions. The next one that came through was, I heard I need to pay tenants for selling my property. Can you explain?
So that's a good one. The legislation does prescribe that if we issue a notice of entry onto a renter for a sales open, we or the rental provider will need to pay compensation for each sales open that can be conducted. Now it is prescribed at $30 or half a day's rent, whatever is higher. So essentially if you're going through a sales campaign and you need to serve a notice of entry to do an open for inspection for sales, then yes, you do need to pay the renter compensation for those sales opens as well.
Okay, we're going to our last question now. Can I ban a tenant with a pet or not?
So that's a good question. That law actually changed in March 2020. The pet laws were introduced last year, and essentially what the laws say is that a rental provider can't refuse consent for a renter to have a pet. So again, we've seen a few case studies in VCAT so far. It is a little bit of a tricky situation. What the process is, if a rental provider doesn't want a renter to bring a pet into their rental property, they need to apply to VCAT and let VCAT hear the case and let VCAT make the final determination. Some of the things that VCAT will look at when they're doing that is they'll look at the size of the pet, they'll look at the characteristics of the property, and they'll kind of make a determination if it's cruel or if it's going to cause too much damage. Now again, we know that renters are responsible for any damages made during the tenancy. So if they do bring a pet in, it's the same procedure that when they vacate, they'll be required to make good of the property. Or obviously, the landlord can get the job done and then pass on the costs back to them via the VCAT process.
Well, Shaun, we made it through. We've been through the safety standards, the minimum housing standards. We've been through everything this evening that's about to change in the Victorian legislation. Thank you for all of your effort in getting all of this information together for us. The questions are still rolling in, so we'll be sure to get those through. But for now, that's all that we have time for this evening. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in. Following this, you will receive an email with more details around the information that we've discussed this evening. And don't forget that we're here to help. Please don't hesitate to reach out to our Ray White officers and our property managers to assist you further with these changes. There's 130 of them. We know them all. We've been studying and we've been prepared for the last 2 years. So bring on the 29th of March, and thank you for tuning in this evening.